How's it going, everyone? And in this video we are going to be talking about AWS CloudFormation. And so this is infrastructure as code, and the purpose of it is to really help us be more efficient in how we version control and deploy resources in AWS. And so I can talk a lot about it, but I think it's best to just kind of walk through an example, and I'll show you guys the exact file that I'll be uploading to AWS in order to take advantage of CloudFormation. And so I have the file here. I'll post a link to it in GitHub. And so the key thing to look at here is that we're viewing this thing called a YAML file, although you can also write your CloudFormation template or CloudFormation stack or YAML or JSON file. They're all the same thing, but these things can be written in those formats, and they've got certain parts to them that if you're viewing this in like Notepad, you can kind of collapse these things and just zero in on specific areas. But what you need to note is that inside of these YAML files, YAML is the easier language to read in my opinion when you're dealing with CloudFormation stuff. This is where we're going to list things out. So in my case, I want to have a region agnostic CloudFormation template here. And so in this YAML file, I'm intentionally not stating a region that I am going to be deploying an instance into. And the way I'm getting around that is I'm defining this parameter, which is a user input, but I can supply a default value. And so basically what this is doing is it's saying to use the latest Amazon Linux 2 thing, and I'm specifically choosing something that is compatible for the architecture of the T2 micro instance, and that's because it's free tier eligible, and again, I'm cheap, so that's the reason why it's a good choice in this instance. And then in addition to that, I'm also defining another parameter called SSH key, and I'm telling AWS what the type of this parameter is, so it's just a key pair. And this is going to be some existing SSH key pair that you will have created beforehand or a priori inside of your AWS account. And this is because we're going to be wanting to have the ability to connect to this instance that we're spinning up through CloudFormation through an SSH connection. And so to do that, we will need that key pair to have locally on the computer in order to validate or authenticate to that instance. So these are the parameters. They're basically inputs. Then we've got the resources tree, or whatever you want to call it, attribute of this YAML file. And I'm basically saying I'm going to have this resource called VS instance 1, and it's going to be a type. So I'm telling AWS it's going to be an EC2 instance right there. And then we're defining the properties of this instance. So it's going to reference the latest Linux AMI ID, which is that parameter I've defined right up here. It's going to be that specific free tier instance type. So and you can comment these files, which I really like. I think it's great for helping people understand your thought process as you're making these things and version controlling them. So like you can go in here and you can do t2.micro, and I'll just say free tier eligible. And then in terms of the key name, this is another way of saying the key pair that we'll have, and we're going to need to reference that somehow. So we'll have this right in here. And if you worked at a company where every key pair had the same exact name, you could just hard code that in this file. But in my case, I'm going to make it so that it's a user input that you'll have to manually specify which exact existing key pair to go with when you're spinning up this thing. And then we're calling a user data script, and in this case, what we're going to be doing is we're actually taking advantage of CFN init. So all we're doing is we are going to be updating the AWS CFN Bootstrap, the CloudFormation Bootstrap package, and then we're going to start CFN init. So that's what it's going to do is it's going to look at this metadata that it's got, and then it's going to the metadata that is pertaining to this instance 1. So that's a child attribute or element of VS instance 1, and what it's going to be doing is just installing a simple web server onto this instance, and then it's going to this CFN init is going to have the process of basically installing HTTPD, which is Apache, and then it's going to also create a file, this index.html file, this location on that EC2 box, and it's going to put this content into that file. So this is going to be our little home page once this thing spins up. And we're also going to ensure that our HTTPD service is going to be enabled and running on our instance itself. And then finally, in addition to my EC2 instance, we've got an SSH security group here that I'm creating, and again, giving it a type, and then we're also specifying the properties to it to say that it's going to allow SSH traffic that's on port 22 from anywhere. and HTTP traffic, that's port 80 from anywhere. And then also just want to make note that this ingress thing is basically the inbound rules. So we're saying that anyone from anywhere can connect to our EC2 instance that we're spinning up, or whatever's associated with our security group on ports 22 and 80. So with that out of the way, I'm going to now go to the little Amazon Management Console page, and I'm signed in right now. And I want to make note it is super important which region you are in based on the region selector right here. So if you're in US East 1, that's different from US East 2, because wherever you spin up your CloudFormation stack, that will be where those resources are going to, that's where you'll see it in CloudFormation. So very important to remember that. I'm going to be doing Northern California here. And then in this little search bar, you can just type in CloudFormation. Click on that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on stacks. And right now I don't have any stacks. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on create stack. I'm going to say the template's already because we've done that. And I can upload this to S3, a little S3 bucket, or I can just upload the file directly from my local computer. I'm going to do that. I'm going to choose my file. And I'm going to go to my downloads. And I'm just going to make sure I'm picking a good one here. And then I'm going to click on open. And so now what it's doing is it's going to be grabbing that YAML file that we've been editing. We're going to click on next. I'm going to give this stack a name. I'll call it VS stack 2 or whatever you want. It's going to note that we have that default right here. And I'm going to do this side by side. So you can see it's already grabbing the default value that we've given it in that parameter. And then in terms of that SSH key, I've already created an SSH key in here. If you don't have one, really quickly, the way you would do that is you would just go, I'll open up this in a new tab. If you go into EC2, you can close that out. And then if you scroll down, you can see that there are key pairs right here. So if you wanted to, you can create a new key pair. And you would need to refresh this page. But in my case, I've already got one key pair I'm going to go with. And I'm going to click on next. So you can see that we got a little drop down because it knows that the type of this SSH key is going to be a key pair. So I'm going to hit next. And now I'm not going to change anything on these pages in terms of permissions or tags. You can tell CloudFormation what to do if something fails. And so what will happen if this is the first time you're rolling out a CloudFormation stack is it'll just delete everything because if it wasn't successful the first time, it'll go back to there being nothing. But you can change that if you wanted to keep the resources that you did. You can click on that box right there and just know that you would be getting billed for it. So be careful if you have a bad rollout, you'll be getting billed for stuff that you're not even using. Stack policies are where you can say exactly what things you want to protect if someone deletes your stack by accident. So if you're working at a company and it's really critical, you've got these EC2 instances always running, you don't want someone to just accidentally delete a CloudFormation stack and then have that delete everything. And then you've got some other options here. I'm just going to hit next. And so we can see that we've got this template URL right here. That's just referencing this local file. They're going to upload it to S3 on their back end. We've got some parameters configured, got my key pair specified, as well as that Linux AMI ID for AL2. And that's about it. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Create Stack. And you can see right now, if I'm going to max the screen here, is it's creating it. And the cool thing about CloudFormation is that while you're running it, you don't need to worry about the order in which you do things because CloudFormation knows the order in which it should do things. And so what it's doing right now is it's starting out with that security group, which I think is pretty cool because, if we look back at our file right here, we defined the security group near, the end, line 50, even though we had defined the EC2 instance first. Because CloudFormation is smart enough to know that it needs to create the security group before it creates an EC2 instance, is doing that. So I think that's pretty cool. You can see it just finished creating the security group, and then it moved on to creating the instance, and then it completed creating that instance, and now it's saying it's finished creating the entire stack. So the stack, again, is just a collection of AWS resources. In my case, that's going to be an SSH, or that security group, as well as the EC2 instance. And then we've also started running that CFN and init script. And one thing I want to note here is that we don't necessarily know if CFN and init is successful. All we know so far is that it's created that instance. So it is something that you would want to check on. later on, and there's this thing called CFN signals that is another topic that we can cover later. But basically, what's happened here is it's created our stack. So to double check that we're seeing what we expect, we can open up this guy. We can see that we should see some instance running, and we should also see a security group created. So if I click here, go to services, and then EC2, if I click on instances, I expect to see a new instance right here. And so I'm just going to click on this guy. And if you click on security, you can also see that it's got these rules on it that are allowing traffic on ports 80 and 22, which is what we specified in our stack. And so right here, it's pretty cool. You can see it appends the name of the YAML file or the template to the security group name, so you know where that came from. And so I'm just going to let this thing finish running up. And another thing you can do is click on connect, and we're going to use EC2 instance connect. And I'm just going to confirm that HTTPD was successfully installed, because that was another part of our script right here, was making sure that if we expand the metadata, it's going to be making sure that yum installs HTTPD. So if I do sudo su, and then I'm going to do yum list installed, it's going to throw me back all the packages that are currently installed on this machine. And then if I wanted to see specifically for a certain one, I could do pipe it to grep and then do HTTPD. And so we can see that we have HTTPD showing up in here, which is great. So that means that the package for Apache Web Server was also installed. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to here and click on that instance ID again. And we can see we've got our little IPv4 address, so that if we wanted to connect to it, we can. And there we go. So we've got a little web server that was created entirely using one CloudFormation template, which is pretty cool. And as a last minute thing, what I will show is also one thing I think makes CloudFormation so powerful is the fact that you can version these things. And so let's say I didn't want it to say hello world anymore. I wanted my web server to say, you know, hello Vincent. So what I can do is I can go in here, and then I'll just say hello Vincent, and then I will I'll save this as something new just so we can see it. Save as, and VS stack 3, and I'm going to save it in my downloads file. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the AWS console. I'll just type in CloudFormation again, CloudFormation, and I'm going to now update my stack, and I'm going to make sure that I'm in that same region where we originally created that stack. And we are, so Northern California. And so I'm going to click on this guy, and I'm going to click on update, and I'm going to replace the current template, and I'm going to upload a template file. So basically we're giving it an entirely new YAML file. So that's that VS stack 3 thing we just created. And I'm going to click on next. And again, it's just going to remember that we've already set those things, so we don't need to really do anything there. And I'm not going to change anything else. And I'm going to hit next. And we're just going to view all this stuff. And so it's seeing that it's going to need to modify these two guys. So we're going to click on update. And we're going to let this thing run through. So it's telling me that it's going to be creating a new SSH security group. It's created that, which is great. And it's also going to be creating a new EC2 instance, and it's going to be running that new file, and it's going to have that new index.html thing. Just going to keep on refreshing this. And one thing I want to note here is that if we go back to EC2, so I'll do this in another tab, close out those guys. We can see that we now have 3 instances that are running. And once my new stack finishes, it's going to delete the stuff that was in that first rollout that we did. So that's all happening. I'm going to refresh this again. So it's shutting down that second instance that we had. It's still initializing the new instance that we just created. So I'm just going to let this thing keep on going. going to connect to this new instance that we've got with EC2 Instance Connect. And we can see that we've got HTTPD installed on our machine. So I'm just going to close out that. And now I'm going to click on this and we're going to open up that IP address. Sometimes these things take a bit to finish rendering, so I might need to come back in a minute, but we should see a new index.html page created from our stack. So just give it a sec. All right, and so there we go. We've got our new updated web page. And we did this entirely through CloudFormation, which is pretty cool. And now that we've done this, the way I'm going to end this video is just show you guys how you can delete all your resources once you're done playing around with your CloudFormation stack. So in my case, I will just go back to that CloudFormation homepage, and then we can click on stacks, and I'm going to click on this guy, and I'm going to click delete. And so we're going to delete every single resource that is associated with our stack, which is great because now I don't need to manually go through EC2 and delete all the security groups and all those other things it created. It just does it automatically. So it is a great way to help you spin down all the resources you've created once you've spin up resources. And something that is just very cost saving here is that if you have things that don't need to always be running, you can shut them down like during the night when you're not at work or over the weekend. And then when you come in the morning, you can just spin them back up with your CloudFormation template. And that's how you can save lots of money in terms of how much money goes to AWS. So very powerful tool that lets you be a lot more agile and resource efficient. So I'm going to wrap things up with that. But thank you all for watching, and I will talk to you guys next time. So